I wanted to start by asking a question. How many people have not watched Black Panther? You haven't watched it? Okay. So it's a must-see for every African or friend of Africa. It's a must-see. So please find some time. Tomorrow is still there, this weekend, to go watch Black Panther. And I'm sure many of you, after watching it, thought, look, why can't there be a country like Wakanda? And as I thought about, our 54 countries, I did see different elements of Wakanda in the various countries. So if you start with Ethiopia, the strong culture and pride that the Ethiopian nation has. It's 3,000 years old. It's a country that has never been colonized and wasn't created by outsiders, so it has a very strong identity. Because the power in Wakanda is the fact that it was modern, but they were still able to keep, their identity, their culture, and their values. So you take Ethiopia, and then you add on the cobalt you find in DRC, because they control about 60% of world output of cobalt. So you then add on South Africa's infrastructure. We're getting to Wakanda. And you take the efficiency of Rwanda. We've heard so much about that. Add on to that the tech savviness of Kenya. You also include some good governance from Mauritius. And I think finally we just need to sprinkle a little Nigerian confidence. Just a little, not too much. and then you have Wakanda. But there is hope. There is hope in our continent, and we must never lose hope. The challenge is huge, without any doubt. And in thinking about the subject, when I reflect on the Standard Bank Group's journey, which is a 155-year-old institution, it has a presence in 20 countries on the continent, which is about 80% of sub-Saharan Africa's GDP. It's also present in 6 international financial centers. And the fact that, with our 54,000 plus employees, we continue to ask ourselves the question, how are we going to scale our operation much faster in a very challenging operating environment? How do we help clients solve real problems, that affect their business? And how can we do this in a sustainable manner? And we don't have a choice. Like I said, we're 155 years old. We've learned many lessons along the way. We try to scale at a point to a level where we weren't adding any impact, which is sort of everywhere, from Cambodia to, you name it. And post the financial crisis, it was very clear that we had to relook our strategy. And, we came to the realization that the place where we can scale and add the most impact is Africa. And so post-2008, all the focus is on driving Africa's growth. The 6 financial centers that we have in New York, London, Beijing, Hong Kong, Dubai, and Sao Paulo is all focused on enabling capital flows into Africa, supporting MNCs into Africa. And our focus is to continue to work to drive our continent forward. So I'm going to very quickly just talk through 3 principles, and I'll show you 3 pictures, and then I'll sit down. So the 3 principles are partnering and collaboration. The second is standardization, and the third, decentralization. And these 3 principles are critical, in my view, for scaling for impact. So we're going to start with partnering and collaboration. So this is the first picture. On the left side, we have the Dakar-Diamniadio toll road in Senegal. I'm sure many of you might have heard of this. A PPP project that was opened on time and completed on time in 2013. And on the right-hand side, we have the famous Foreshore Freeway Bridge in Cape Town in South Africa. Construction stopped on this bridge in 1977. It's about 40 years ago. It's still uncompleted. The reality is that the infrastructure gap in sub-Saharan Africa is about $93 billion per annum. That covers both capital expenditure and maintenance. As per the World Bank, about 45 billion of this comes from government sources, multilaterals, etc. So there's about a 50 billion funding gap that has to be met, which the governments of the African countries cannot provide. And infrastructure is critical for enabling growth. They say build it and they will come. So despite the fact that, there is a lot of criticism about public-private partnerships, the reality is, I don't think there is a choice. There has to be collaboration across all facets of society, both locally and internationally. It's very difficult to work together. It's much easier to try and go it alone, like we saw in Cape Town, but the risk is you run out of steam, run out of gas. And in looking quickly at some of the reasons why the toll road in Senegal succeeded, was because, first of all, there was political stability and a strong political will to get this project completed. In fact, the agency that drove the project reported directly to the president. We also found out that they had to manage multiple stakeholders across communities, NGOs, the press, judiciary, the opposition, you name it. But they did it. So despite the fact that the actual project from signing of the concession to completion took maybe just over 4 years, the actual work started like 6 years before in terms of getting traffic studies done, which was funded by the World Bank, socializing the project, preparing and just getting ready for what was going to be transformational for the economy. Other things that they had to do was to proactively deal with the dislocation of people. There are about 3,000 people, that were displaced. They had to proactively look at that and look for alternative places for the people to move in. And very importantly, they had to make sure that there was a transparent process during the bidding and procurement periods, where by law an infrastructure council was set up, and that comprised of all facets of society, judiciary, politicians, business, even the opposition were brought into that council to make sure that they went through a transparent process and ended up with a competent concessionaire, that could deliver the project on time and on budget. But it took a lot of hard work, and it's much harder to collaborate than to go alone. But we must accept this principle and we must work hard to make it happen. The distrust between the public sector and the private sector has to be bridged. And there is a lot of distrust. But ultimately it's about sharing risk. Ultimately it's about having a clear and open discussion about risk and reward, and a joint commitment, to do what it takes to make the projects happen. And I believe that if we do get it right, we will get more and more projects, infrastructure projects being delivered in Africa to close that funding gap of about 50 billion US dollars, and to enable the much needed growth that will enable the economy to scale significantly. If I move on to the second slide, and the second principle, which is standardization, and I used M-Pesa. I know it's an example that we all know very well about, and I know Bob Collymore has been here himself to talk about it. But the reality is, to scale, you need an operating model that enables that ability to scale, and you can't do that without technology. One of the things that we have done in Standard Bank over the past 10 years is to just replace a disparate collection of core banking systems into one modern, core banking system in most of our jurisdiction. And what that has done, it has provided the stability in terms of a technological platform to be able to build digital solutions on that, to solve clients' problems. We found out that over the past 3 years, the rate of transactions, being handled digitally has been growing about 40% odd per annum. On the other hand, transactions on physical channels have been declining. So you need a platform that will enable you to easily scale and easily grow. We've seen from the numbers here that clients grew from 9 million to 25 million between 2010 and 2016. Person-to-person transactions per month grew more than 5-fold, over the same period. And M-Pesa is so embedded in the Kenyan way of life. A Kenyan colleague of mine was telling me about when there was a hitch at some point, there was a failure for a few hours on their platform a couple of years ago, and it was almost like a national crisis because people had got so used to transacting on the platform. But you have to standardize if you want to scale up. In addition to technology, what is also important is just making sure that you have policies in place that you replicate across your network. You have proper governance standards. You've got proper boards, who have the same values, who understand your mission and your purpose. We've also tried to standardize even our recruits, our graduates. We have a graduate scheme, that we've rolled out across the continent, really to just work on that principle of standardizing, and on the back of that, being able to scale quite rapidly. The third picture is just the map of Standard Bank's footprint in 1992 and 2018. This is within Africa. Like I said, we are present in 6 financial centers outside Africa. One of the lessons we very quickly learned is that you cannot micromanage remote business operations. You have to build on-ground capabilities in each of the countries. So we have teams, in our presence countries, who understand the local markets, who are competent leaders, well-respected, and who can run the business. They know the opportunities that are there locally. They understand the governance standards, our policies, so they're operating within that, But there's a risk appetite for the country. and they run within that, and as a result, we have seen the Africa regions, which is really sub-Saharan Africa, contribution, to the Standard Bank Group overall headline earnings increased from well below 10% to about 30% today. And the expectation is that that contribution is going to continue to grow as we look at the trajectory of GDP growth in sub-Saharan Africa. So you can't achieve scale without decentralization. If you have a sort of centralized model, you can only go so far. You can only manage so far. Some of these operations, managing millions of clients, have their own operating platform, are driving scale and growth in large markets with aggressive domestic competitors. You can't run it remotely. So decentralization is critical. You've got to empower the leaders in the different markets. You've got to make sure that you have a strong pipeline of leadership. That's why the work of many, African universities, and I, single out the Africa Leadership Network. Fred and his team, are doing a great job in just trying to prepare the next generation of leaders, in Africa. And any work that we collectively can do, we're talking this morning, in the Human Capital breakfast meeting about, how it's so important to enable the young people in Africa to be skilled, to get the experience, to be able to contribute, to build them up, to help run businesses. And as we do that, then the potential that we also desperately want to convert, into actual GDP growth and economic well-being for Africa will be realized. In conclusion, I just want to re-emphasize, those 3 points, those 3 principles of, partnership and collaboration, standardization and decentralization are important drivers to achieving scale. And scale is not an end in itself, it's a means to an end. As we continue to scale operations on the continent, as we continue to grow small businesses into larger businesses, as we continue to basically just drive the value chain across all key sectors and segments, I do believe that we will see the growth that we want to see in Africa. Thank you very much.